Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, a conversation with the recently appointed CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. As change sweeps the nation and its armed services, how are veterans being affected? Our reporter digs into the details with Marine Corps veteran Kyle Ann Hunter. Plus, we learn about a new program aimed at supporting Afghan allies. Coming to you from Washington, D.C., it's the latest in news and analysis, from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly.
Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Leo Shane, Capitol Hill Bureau Chief for Military Times, coming to you today from our studio in Washington, D.C. Today we're here to dive into veterans' concerns, specifically as they relate to troops who served in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and what issues they're facing today. A new administration in the White House and a new administration in VA have been driving rapid changes in veterans policy since earlier this year. And who better to talk to us than Marine Corps veteran Kyle Ann Hunter? How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. You were recently appointed the new CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, so congratulations on that, and I'm sorry on that, because I know there's a lot of work with that. I know you've been in the position for a few months now, but I know one of the challenges the IAVA has had is trying to keep the recent wars relevant. I mean, we're moving further and further away from folks actually on the ground. The headlines are shifting towards the potential wars of the future, towards the changes in the thing. What is your biggest challenge when you're looking at the population of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans and keeping the public informed in just what their issues are and making sure that they're being paid attention to?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And it has been a challenge to keep these sort of wars in the forefront of the public mind, even as they were happening. It was, I think, right after 9/11, we saw a big surge in public support for the troops. I think even then again, after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, we saw again another sort of public zeitgeist movement of this. But for decades at this point, it's been sort of out of the front of mind of the public, right? It's been very easy to forget about it. But what's really important to remember is that these were the longest wars that the U.S. has been in. For nearly 2 decades, we were involved in sustained combat operations. And for our generation that served in Iraq and Afghanistan, most of the people served multiple tours and deployments that we had there. Folks served in a variety of different capacities, given the type of warfare that we were serving. We had people often serving outside of their primary military occupational specialty. So while advocacy is really our key tenet at IAVA, education is very important as well. And education in educating our veterans as to why this matters, but really the public. Why should the public care about veterans issues? The post 9/11 generation of veterans is the most diverse that we have ever seen on every single factor of diversity. I know that sometimes can sound like a bad word, but it's just the truth that we have right now. And these are folks who are now in the civilian population doing every single job under the sun, right? So why does this matter to the American people is that the veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, we're not some isolated class anymore that's doing combat rotation after combat rotation after combat rotation. We're your neighbors. We're teachers, bankers, firefighters, across the gamut. And that's why the American people really need to keep caring.
I think it's interesting, and with you bringing up that it's a different war, it's a different deployment. I think a lot of folks thought, as we went into these wars, okay, well, we've got the infrastructure, you've got the old VA, you've got the old transition things and everything, but it is such a different conflict and a different response back home. As you said, there's, you've got a very, very diverse population. You've got them moving into the workforce. They're bringing skills and experiences that are different. Those multiple deployments are things. So, I mean, how much do you get the sense that the public does appreciate that and does understand this now that we are starting to get pretty far in here? This is more than 20 years. It's a lesson that we should have picked up.
We should have, but I think unfortunately it's still very easy to not think about veterans issues on a day-to-day basis, right? I think, and it's the public sort of sees veterans as one of two ways. Either this class that we put on a pedestal as some amazing, almost superhuman side, right? That they need to be revered in every single way and they're flawless, or we're portrayed as being these broken, angry, PTSD-riddled people, and neither of which are very necessarily easy for the public to deal with, right? It's sort of easier to reduce us to those. Where in reality, we are people who just want to be back in the workforce, back engaging. But as you started to allude to, sort of the old VA infrastructure isn't set up to really handle either the type of population that we are, the type of compound and cumulative exposures that we had, both physically, mentally, and psychologically, as well as how we really meaningfully leverage all of the skills that were built over the course of these conflicts to improve the workforce, right? To improve the America as a country. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, and the veterans are people too thing is one that I like to pull out in
Yeah,
conversations.
exactly.
They're reminding folks this is not some sort of weird other that we're including. These are your neighbors.
We live among you.
Exactly. So look, you've been in the advocacy world for quite some time on a lot of veterans issues and larger societal issues. So this is not new to you, but you are new to IAVA. Is there anything that since you've come in, you've been surprised that has been a focus or an issue that you're going to need to tackle now that you're helming this organization, which has been a pretty important voice for the last 20 years on these issues?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest surprises is that when we go out and we survey our members, we talk to the folks who are veterans and who are part of our advocacy programs, is that they don't only care about the VA as an issue, right? I think it's easy to say, oh, they care about veterans' health care, they care about veterans' employment. They do, but there's so many other issues that are really top of mind for this population, whether it is access to public lands, which has come up quite a bit, the ability to go out and really enjoy public lands as something that we fought for, as one of our partners once said, that like parks are patriotic, right? This is part of who we are. The deep continued commitment to our allies, and not just our Iraq and Afghanistan allies, which I know we'll talk about, but our NATO allies, our place in the world, right? The sense that everything that we did for 20 years was only done shoulder to shoulder with our friends and allies. So that sort of foreign policy piece that people deeply care about. But also, broader issues are top of mind, whether it is access to SNAP benefits, access to Medicaid benefits, something which many of our members have benefited from these programs. So I think it was a surprise as just how widespread the issues are that both our members care about and they see really directly touching their lives. And so the VA isn't the only veterans issue that's out there. There's a lot of other sort of public support infrastructure that is essential for veterans to thrive.
Okay. You mentioned the Afghan allies issue, and I know this is one that the organization has been focused on for quite some time. You guys recently announced a partnership with Afghan EVAC for the Battle Buddies program. This actually puts veterans into courthouses and judicial hearings with individuals, with Afghan immigrants who are trying to work through some of the issues we're seeing now. So talk to me about the decision to partner on that and why this is an important program.
Yeah, so Battle Buddies is something I'm incredibly excited and proud about. This came in relation to Saeed, who worked with the U.S. DoD, as well as a few other U.S. government agencies in Afghanistan. He came here legally. He followed the process that he was supposed to follow through here. He was on parole awaiting his permanent status hearing. He went to the courthouse and he was detained at this point. And that story is really what launched Battle Buddies, because it resulted in huge outcry from our community. If we look at, historically, going back 20 years, over 75% of our members think that we need to be doing more to make it easier for our wartime allies to come here. And so seeing him detained, we thought, what is one thing that we can do right away? Well, one thing we can do is stand shoulder to shoulder with these allies the way that they did with us when we were in their country, right? We showed up in their countries, they stood shoulder to shoulder because they believe in democracy, because they believe in the rule of law. And as a result of what they did for us, we promised them a safe and meaningful pathway here, right? Pathway to the US, that we would protect them. These people are under incredible distress in Afghanistan in particular, but now we're seeing Iraq also become more and more dangerous. And they're in danger because they helped us. And so this program it's not a protest, it's not political, it is an opportunity for veterans to raise their hand and stand up and accompany our Afghan wartime allies to their hearings to bear witness, to witness the rule of law, and to send a message that we're not going anywhere. We've had over 500 veteran volunteers in all 50 states now sign up, and we're starting to partner and pair those veterans with our wartime allies who need it. And as things like temporary protected status and special immigrant visas are more and more in flux, the need's only going to be greater for us to continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with them.
All right, great. Listen, time for a quick break. When we come back, we'll discuss how VA cuts have affected younger veterans, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly, where we're talking with Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America CEO Kyle Ann Hunter. Kyle Ann, we've seen a fair amount of upheaval at the Pentagon and the VA in the last few months, and I wanted to dive into some of that. What are you hearing from your members about the concerns they're seeing, both changes at the Pentagon and changes at the VA right now?
So, as you said, we've seen a lot of upheaval. I'm going to start with the VA first and then move to the Pentagon, because I think they are very, very interrelated. But I think understanding sort of the feelings about the VA relate to why there's so many concerns about what's happening in the Pentagon. So there's been a lot of opaqueness around the VA right now. There was words that there was going to be a reduction in force of 83,000 VA employees, and nobody really knew where they were coming from. Then it came out that no, we're not going to actually be doing that through normal attrition. We're going to be losing about 30,000 VA employees, but still, we don't know where they're actually coming from. We're also hearing, if you're looking at the budgets and some of the lines that are coming out of Congress, that there's a diversion of billions and billions from VHA direct care into community care, and this as well is leading to concerns as to what sort of programs, because the biggest concern that we're hearing from our members is what is actually going to be cut. Mm-hmm. And because it is opaque, and what constitutes and who gets to define what a vital VA program is. And are they going to say, oh, if it serves only a small amount of veterans, it's going to be cut? Well, for those veterans that it serves, it's absolutely essential. And when we look at things like women-specific healthcare programs, women are still a minority of veterans, but we are the fastest growing group of veterans. And within the next 10 to 15 years, the percentage of women veterans is going to almost double, largely based on how many women really came into Iraq and Afghanistan. And these are women who want VA care, and I'll say this like myself as well, because we've had experiences that are very unique from the civilian woman population. And so having culturally competent care that understands what military service was, what sorts of environmental exposures we were exposed to, what sort of psychological and potential mental health issues we might have, and really how those all interact together is essential. So our biggest concern is, what is going to be cut, and who's deciding where these cuts are coming from. There's a lot of concern that we're hearing about that.
Let's come back to that cuts in a minute, but talk to me about that issue of female veterans getting care in VA, and how, because you've used these services for a while, how have the services improved? This has been a I don't want to say problem, but an issue, a point of improvement for quite some time. Prior to this administration, was VA on the right path? Was it making progress, at least in getting those services and getting some of the improvements that we've heard are needed over the years?
Absolutely, and the VA, and I think part of this is every single person, of our membership, and I think broadly of the listenership and readership that you have here, know that the VA can do better, and should continue to do better. When we're talking about women veterans in particular, over the past 2 decades, but really past decade, there have been marked improvements to care for women veterans. It started out, I remember when I was back in military service, there was sort of this view that like, oh, don't use the VA, you're going to get lost. But now, if we look at things like the Deborah Sandman Act that has been passed, if we look at like the Kate Hendrick-Thomas Mammogram Act, right, there is a recognition that women veterans have had unique experiences and exposures, and therefore require unique care, whether that is getting mammograms earlier on, whether that is having specially trained primary care physicians who understand military sexual trauma and how it interacts with other potential physical or mental health issues, whether it is very dedicated anti-harassment, anti-discrimination, and education campaigns within the VA to really learn and understand the experience of women veterans. The improvements have, yes, we can always go more, but they have been leaps and bounds over the past decade. And this is where one of the biggest concerns are among our members is, because women are still the minority, are these some of the first programs to be on the chopping block? We don't know right now.
Well, and I guess to your point earlier, that seems to be the big concern among a lot of the veterans groups I talk to and a lot of veterans. Not necessarily that we know cuts are coming, but that the communication there is limited and there's just a lot of fear and confusion about what comes next.
Correct. And we know that the most vulnerable are going to be falling through the cracks. And that's where our concerns come, because it has been a effort to get women veterans into VA services for a whole host of reasons there. But I think this also then relates to some of our concerns about what we're seeing happen in the Pentagon right now, where we've seen the dismissal of several very high-ranking women in the military without a whole lot of explanation. And I think if we talk about a meritocracy, women and men deserve to get promoted the same. They deserve to get fired the same, right? If they're not performing. But again, there's been this sort of shroudedness as to what led to some of these dismissals. And so we don't have women in these senior ranks right now. We've also seen a lot of just actually very false rhetoric around the fact that women are held to different standards than men, that they've been held to lower standards. This a decade ago with the removal of the women in ground combat exclusion, it was set very, very transparently that occupational standards were the same for women and men. They are all very difficult standards to achieve. But with this narrative and with this rhetoric, one of our concerns is that it's going to continue to make it more and more difficult to get women veterans into the care they need, because there's this sense that we are starting to hear from our members and from other veterans that women aren't regarded as equals any longer. And knowing that there are such different experiences between women veterans and their civilian counterparts, we need to be getting them into the most culturally competent care, which is life-saving.
Listen, time for one more quick break. When we come back, our financial expert has tips to protect you from disaster fraud. Later, we'll have more of my conversation with IAVA's new CEO, so don't go away.
Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union returns to give you tips on how to protect yourself from disaster fraud.
When hurricanes, wildfires, and other emergencies strike, tensions run high and whole communities are in vulnerable situations. It's unfortunate but true that scam artists use this opportunity to prey on victims of crisis moments. It's something called disaster fraud. Scammers target both those affected by the disaster and people trying to lend a helping hand. The usual tactics are phony disaster relief campaigns, cleanup assistance, and charitable donations. Scammers pretend to work for government organizations like FEMA, saying you need to pay a fee to apply for emergency assistance. And for those trying to repair damage to their homes or seeking aid, beware of fake contractors demanding upfront payment, bogus relief supply sellers who never deliver on what they promise, rental scams targeting displaced families, and charity impersonators stealing donations from those who want to help. To protect yourself, never pay for disaster aid. Verify contractor IDs and contact information, and research the charities before you donate. Your awareness and vigilance when disaster strikes will help you avoid these scams so you can focus on what's really important, your safety.
To get more coverage of military and defense topics, jump out of that Chinook and land on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the most news-savvy vet at this year's reunion, sign up for our early bird brief, compiled each morning bringing you the most recent headlines. And if social media is how you stay up to date, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And we're on TikTok, so go follow us there as well. When we come back, the conclusion of our conversation with IAVA CEO Kyle Ann Hunter. Don't go away.
Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm here with Kyle Ann Hunter, CEO of IAVA, talking about veterans policies and the community challenges. So, wanted to talk to you a little bit about the PACT Act, which has been instrumental for younger veterans, for the IAVA group, and I know is one that the organization has been really focused on. What is the next step in that process? I know there's been, we've seen the improvements in how disability claims are handled. We've seen more folks brought into the medical process, but I still feel like there's a lot more when we're talking about burn pits and the after effects of the recent wars that we still need to get into, and maybe a lot of the public thinks was kind of already taken care of and we're past.
Yeah, so if we think about the PACT Act, we think about sort of the next phase, right, what PACT Act 2.0, or the implementation of the PACT Act needs to be, I think there's three big areas we need to look at. One is you're remembering that this is a generation, the post 9/11 generation of veteran is aging. You know, we are, if you think about especially folks who were in those initial pushes in Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, are in 50s, 60s, some even up to 70s. So really looking at how do these exposures and how do the impact of these exposures change and how they may manifest as people age. And whether that is, you know, we've been very active in pushing for more research around menopause and perimenopause as it relates to toxic exposure, because that research just doesn't exist. How exposures may interact with other sort of normal, quote unquote, age-related issues that bubble up, whether it is changes in eyesight, whether it is, you know, your need for colonoscopies, things in that regard, right? Like, are there issues related to exposure that change as we age? So that's one area where there's a lot of more research that needs to be done. So we ensure that care continues to be culturally competent and relevant. The next area is when we think about the PACT Act, we talked a lot about burn pits and the exposures to sort of the environmental toxins from the burn pits perspective. There's been a real push within the community to look at technological exposures that have happened. You know, if we think about the 20 years of Iraq and Afghanistan, there were huge technological advancements, whether it was with aircraft, with our vehicles, with our communication equipment that was there. But we still don't know fully what impact those pieces of technology have on the human body, right? Whether there's things like aircraft survivability equipment that send out, you know, radar signals to block incoming potential ordnance.
I know there's been a handful of research on the blast pressure waves from some of these heavy ordinances. So.
Yep, exactly. And then that's the next year, these new heavy ordinances that we have, what it means for these subconcussive blast pressures that are there, right? Yeah. So looking at exposures beyond just the environmental impact of exposures is another piece of the PACT Act that we really need to focus on to get the research so that we know what the impacts might be so we can proactively treat people, right? Preventative care is always better than needing to do interventions once something has happened. And then finally is looking domestically at exposures that have occurred and happened as part of the PACT Act, whether it is water and water contaminants. You know, we know that a huge majority of our military bases don't have adequate water testing. You know, Camp Lejeune is sort of in the news all the time, but there's a whole lot more where this is an issue, as well as we have several Superfund sites that are on or very close to military bases, so really doing more work there. And then I know he said 3, but I'm asked 4 as a final one on here too, which is really the impact of toxic exposures on reproductive health and the ability for family formation. You know, anecdotally, we are starting to hear that there have been issues and concerns with fertility or the ability to successfully carry pregnancies to terms, or even the development of tumors and cancers in children of veterans who are exposed. And so there does need to be more work done to look at, you know, what is the long-term impact, again, so that we can ensure the right sort of care gets to those who were exposed.
I appreciate you spending some time educating all of us on this today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today.
For more coverage on all these topics, visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com. You can also follow all of our headlines on our social media channels. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.